Hi, I'm Janelle Lehman, and I'm presenting on dialectical behavior therapy, also known as DBT. And the history of DBT is really fascinating, so I'm going to take a minute to discuss that. It was created by a woman named Marsha Linehan, and she's a psychologist and an author. And her experience was as a youth, she was a confident, happy girl, very socially engaged, and suddenly her senior year of high school, she experienced a complete breakdown for no known reason and was admitted to a mental health institution in Connecticut. And she described that experience as being extremely full of anguish. And she said she experienced out of control storms of emotional torture and was felt that there was no escape and was desperate. She prayed daily to God to feel his presence in her life and didn't receive any answer there. But she did make a vow to God during this time that she would pull herself out of this hell and that she would create a way for other people to help pull themselves out of hell as well. And that is what she did. She became determined to find a therapy that would work for people, individuals who were suicidal and borderline personality disorder. So, a little bit more, as she was practicing her therapy, she was a behavior therapist, and it was through trial and error that she came across DBT, that she came up with DBT. Because in behavior therapy, especially with clients who were borderline personality or suicidal, they were very, very sensitive to suggestions for change. And so a lot of times behavior therapy's approach would leave clients feeling invalidated. So then she swung to the other end of the pendulum of therapies and offered acceptance-based approach to these same individuals or types of clients. And they were still emotionally dysregulated, and they still felt that they this time weren't being targeted, but they felt hopeless for change. So they lacked, so both ends of the pendulum were helpful, but both needed the other side for to balance out the approaches. And so she felt that she was walking along this tightrope between the two approaches. And one day her assistant said to her, well, what you're doing is working in dialectics, which is a scientific term, which means a method of examining and discussing opposing ideas in order to find the truth. So there's that idea of the oppositional forces, that tension that's needed to find the truth. And then that is her also similar to her definition of dialectics, which is tension or synthesis of opposites. So an example of dialectics, if I were to tell you, if you take the color black and the color white and put them together, what do you get? And most of us would say gray. But another answer could be plaid, because this is black and white, but both are maintaining their essential elements. They are not compromised. They are synthesized. So that is the essence of dialectics, where you want to use both behavior change and elements of mindfulness, of acceptance. So in this process of developing DBT, the basic tenets are to incorporate aspects of both sides of that pendulum. So you're going to have skills that work and therapies that work to promote change, while balanced with approaches with mindfulness and acceptance, so that they both become balanced. And DBT is a comprehensive therapy. It covers all of the bases, so there is no additional therapy needed. And it is a modular therapy, so each lesson and each session is built on a specific module, and that makes it very flexible for the therapist and the client. So modules can be added in as needed and subtracted as needed. And it's especially helpful with this multi-diagnostic group, because oftentimes individuals seeking DBT have more than one diagnosis going on that they are seeking to address. So Marsha went on to become a Zen master, and so she really has been able to balance both aspects of her scientific background, that methodology that comes from behavior therapy, and also the awareness and mindfulness practices that she acquired through her Zen training. And DBT becomes this art of balancing both. So the nature of the counseling relationship looks like a ladder that you are offering the client. The therapist is teaching the client step by step how to climb and get themselves out of that hell that they are experiencing, that severe emotional distress that they are experiencing. So the therapist is not up here at the top of the ladder pulling the client out. They get down here and validate how the client feels, and they are down at the depths of hell with their client, and then from behind they support and teach their client how to step by step get out. And that's very empowering for the client. So the populations best served are, of course, the high risk for suicidality, as we've discussed, as well as the borderline personality disorder. That is specifically the demographic that this therapy was designed for. But it is also helpful and has been proven to be successful for bipolar disorder, PTSD, ADHD, eating disorders, multiple axis 1 disorders, high-risk adolescents, college students, specifically those who drink to regulate their emotions, and friends and family of BBT. So those are individuals that do not have mental disorders themselves, but oftentimes people who need DBT are resistant to getting therapy. So it's helpful even for friends and family to get therapy, and they can model what is needed for the client or for the individual who needs the therapy. Why BBT? Because they are the highest risk for suicide. So this is the group that is oftentimes rejected or untreatable from other clinicians. So this is specifically who Marcia wanted to target or address. And so it is also, DBT is also the only empirically supported treatment for BPD. One interesting statistic, DBT reduces the need for medical care and medications in suicidal clients by as much as 90%, which is amazing. So it's hugely effective. It's a hugely effective treatment, especially for borderline personality disorders and suicidal. Okay, there are 4 stages of therapy, and there are 2 parts to each, two-part strategy. So each therapeutic session consists of the acceptance part and the skills training part. So there is a portion of the session that is dedicated to problem solving, discussing what's going on in the client's lives, validating those concerns. And then another portion of equal importance is teaching a new skill, whether it be behavioral or mindfulness. So the first stage then of these 4 stages is to stabilize the client to get them out of suicidality or self-harm. The quiet desperation of the second stage is allowing all forms of emotion, but not action. The third stage is to reduce ordinary problems in everyday living, which is the problem solving that we discussed from the session, half of the session being devoted to that. And then the final stage is increased sense of completeness, find joy, and or transcendence. So if we're visualizing that ladder, this would be at the top few rungs of that ladder. This is quite a long process. It's typically a year with weekly visits, and I will continue on with what that actually looks like. So there are 4 essential elements to the process. They include a skills training group. So the skills training is what is so effective, and it's happening, and they're learning this in a group setting and as well as an individual psychotherapy setting. Oops. So they're receiving each of these trainings typically weekly, and then a phone consultation typically weekly to check in on homework, and journaling is also required. And then for the therapist, there's a weekly consultation team meeting. If you're practicing DBT as a therapist, you are required to meet with other DBT therapists weekly to ensure that you are getting the support you need, as well as you're adhering to the specific DBT protocols in your treatments. Okay, so some of the skills that are worked on, there are 4 specific skill sets that are worked on in DBT. The first is a mindfulness skills, and I've listed here some examples of what those are. So the what and how skills are just a few examples. So what are you doing? Just being observant, describing what it is you're doing, engaging, and then journaling about that and just being aware. And then how are you doing that? How can you show up with a non-judgmental mindset? How can you focus on one thing at a time? How can you have effective focus? So those are just some examples of mindfulness skills. Distress tolerance is incredibly important for these individuals because they lack the ability to experience even a small degree of stress. and that leads to emotional dysregulation. So ways that is worked on is delay of gratification, or small amounts of time being temporarily discomfortable and working their way up. Emotion regulation is an important skill to learn because they are so sensitive and hyper reactive, that this is an important skill set to work on, as are interpersonal effectiveness skills, because oftentimes these individuals do suffer and are almost drawn to unhealthy relationships, whether it's because of past trauma they've experienced, or their ways of communicating are often emotionally dysregulated. The skills that are worked on here are managing interpersonal conflict, ending destructive friendships, and so on. So lastly, something that is really cool is that there is actual scientific evidence and research has been done to show that neurological change does happen through DBT, specifically in the limbic and prefrontal cortex areas of the brain, which is associated with that hyper reactive or emotional dysregulation. Individuals who have gone through DBT actually have structural differences in their brain after the therapy. And then this is a perfect way to end this presentation. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that's the acceptance piece balanced with the change piece. And then dialectics is the wisdom to know the difference.